It is a uh, profoundly terrifying thought experiment to just sit down and honestly ask yourself, what do you do when everything has been taken from you?
Oh, absolutely. It's the kind of question most people actively try to avoid.
Right. I mean, absolutely everything. Your stability, your position, your comfort, maybe even the physical place you call home.
Yeah.
When the dust settles and you are just standing there in the ruins, what is the very next step?
That is the ultimate question.
It is. And chapter 15 of Albert Pike's text, Morals and Dogma, which focuses on the archetype of the Knight of the East, is essentially a survival manual for that exact moment.
It really is.
It argues that before you can even pick up a single brick to rebuild, you have to undergo this total internal transformation.
And to truly grasp the gravity of this chapter, we have to look at the historical, or rather the allegorical foundation it rests upon.
Okay, set the scene for us.
Right, so the archetype of the Knight of the East is directly tied to the story of Zerubbabel and the Babylonian exile. We are talking about a massive historical catastrophe. Jerusalem was entirely sacked.
Wow.
The Great Temple was leveled to the ground, and the population was dragged away into captivity in Babylon, and they lived in exile for decades.
Just a complete and total uprooting of an entire society.
Exactly. And when a remnant finally secured permission to return home, they weren't walking back into the glorious, functioning city of their ancestors.
Right.
They were walking to an absolute wasteland, piles of charred rubble.
The ultimate scene of total loss. And for a bit of context, if you've been following along with our deep dives into this text, the previous chapter was all about turning inward.
Yeah, chapter 14.
Right. It focused on strict personal discipline, internal integrity, basically getting your own mental house in order. But now we are shifting outward.
Yep.
We are moving out of the quiet study and stepping directly into the harsh elements. We're looking at how a person functions when they are standing in the middle of that allegorical wasteland you just described.
And to understand how to rebuild from absolutely nothing, the text insists we first have to fundamentally redefine what it means to be truly free.
Okay, let's unpack this, because liberation is a huge theme here.
It is. And what's fascinating here is that Pike establishes a definition of freedom that completely bypasses our modern surface-level understanding.
How so? Like, what does the modern version look like compared to his?
Well, we tend to think of freedom purely as a physical state, You aren't in a physical cage, you aren't actively restricted by a governing body, therefore, boom, you are supposedly free.
Right, the whole I can go where I want and do what I want mindset.
Exactly. But the text argues that physical autonomy is almost irrelevant if you are internally enslaved.
Enslaved by what, though?
By your own fears and attachments. True liberation demands an absolute independence of thought, an unwavering strength of character, and above all else, complete liberation from fear.
That is huge. Because liberation from fear is the actual anchor of this entire philosophy.
It really is the bedrock.
Like, think about it. If you are terrified of losing your social status, your actions aren't your own. They are entirely dictated by that fear.
Exactly.
If you are terrified of financial ruin, your daily choices are held hostage by that anxiety. You might be walking around in the free world, but mentally, you are living in a maximum security prison designed entirely by your own insecurities.
And that invisible prison is incredibly common. I mean, we build massive structural buffers to keep ourselves safe.
What kind of buffers?
Financial safety nets, carefully curated social circles, rigid daily routines. We build all of this specifically to avoid confronting those underlying fears.
So we just insulate ourselves.
Right. And the Knight of the East archetype represents an individual who realizes that if your sense of freedom depends entirely on external circumstances remaining perfectly stable and comfortable, well, you were never actually free to begin with.
Wow.
You were just well insulated.
Which means that if true freedom is strictly internal, then physical loss or displacement isn't actually stripping away your freedom at all.
Not at all.
It's just stripping away your distractions.
Yeah.
It's forcefully removing all the buffers you used to hide from yourself.
And being left completely exposed without those buffers is terrifying. It forces you to confront whether you possess any genuine independence of thought or if you are simply, echoing the opinions and values of the comfortable environment you used to inhabit.
Right, because when the environment is gone, what's left of you?
Exactly. And this is why the text does not view loss or exile as an unfair glitch in the universe. It views the crucible of displacement as an essential diagnostic tool.
A diagnostic tool. I like that.
Yeah, you cannot accurately measure the strength of your own internal liberation until every external crutch is kicked away. The harshness of the void is the only place where the self is completely exposed.
Okay, so once those crutches are gone,
Yeah.
and you are standing in the cold reality of that void,
Yeah,
the only mechanism that keeps you moving forward is resilience.
absolutely.
And the text treats resilience with incredible gravity.
Yeah.
It is not just the modern cliche of bouncing back.
No, not at all.
It is a visceral, gritty ability to continue despite immense difficulty. It is an absolute categorical refusal to surrender to the void. But the text makes a massive claim here.
It does.
It insists that true strength is only ever revealed in adversity, never in comfort. And I have to push back on this a little bit to spark some discussion here.
Go for it.
Isn't a major part of the human drive to achieve some level of comfort? I mean, why is adversity the only valid measuring stick for strength? Why can't we be strong while, sipping a coffee on a peaceful Tuesday morning?
That is a very fair question. But if we connect this to the bigger picture, the desire for that peaceful Tuesday morning is exactly the trap Pike is warning about.
Wait, really? The peace itself is a trap.
It's not that comfort is inherently evil, it's that comfort is deeply deceptive.
Deceptive how?
When you are comfortable, your environment is doing the heavy lifting for you. It breeds a false sense of security, which rapidly inflates the ego. You start to believe you are strong simply because nothing is actively testing your structural integrity.
Ah,
So the peaceful Tuesday morning is an unreliable mirror.
because you don't actually need a strong foundation if the weather is perfectly calm.
Exactly.
Like a house made of cardboard looks incredibly stable on a sunny day.
That is a perfect way to put it. Adversity is the storm that exposes the cardboard.
Right.
If you have never been faced with a situation where compromising your deepest integrity would save you from absolute ruin, you simply do not know if you have integrity. You only have a working theory of your own character.
A working theory. That hits hard.
Yeah, adversity translates that theory into stark reality by forcing the individual to tap into hidden reserves they didn't even know existed.
It is essentially the mechanics of metallurgy.
Oh, is that
Like, if you want to make steel shatter resistant, you don't just leave it sitting at room temperature in a comfortable warehouse. You have to temper it.
Right, you have to subject it to extremes.
You throw the raw iron into a blazing furnace, you bring it to its absolute critical failure point, and then you rapidly cool it. The fire isn't just unpleasant, it is violently altering the internal crystalline structure of the metal.
Yes.
The adversity fundamentally rearranges the internal composition so that when the material finally takes a massive hit later on, it absorbs the shock instead of breaking. Comfort is just room temperature. It leaves the internal structure completely unchanged and fragile.
And the human spirit operates on that exact same mechanism. The crucible of exile, the intense pressure of loss, those are the furnaces. Enduring that heat is the only way the Knight of the East tempers their character. Surviving the fire proves that the internal structure has shifted. They have faced the absolute worst-case scenario, total ruin.
And discover that they still exist.
Exactly. They didn't evaporate.
Surviving the furnace is monumental. But survival alone isn't the ultimate goal here, is it?
No, it's just the prerequisite.
Because surviving just means the fire didn't kill you. Once the embers cool, you are left standing in the ashes of whatever you lost. The adrenaline of the survival phase fades, and now you face the agonizingly slow, deliberate process of the rebuild.
Which is often the hardest part.
Oh, without a doubt. And from everything we've covered, this text places a massive emphasis on learning from the collapse.
It does. The text outlines that rebuilding requires intense vision, immense effort, and profound patience.
It's not a quick fix.
No, the Knight of the East is not supposed to blindly start stacking bricks in a panic just to recreate what was lost. The core mechanism of this phase is growth through self-awareness.
Okay, so what does that self-awareness look like in practice?
They must deeply reflect on the ruins. They have to audit their past experiences and actively identify the structural flaws that led to the collapse in the first place. The ultimate goal is not to restore the past, but to construct something inherently superior.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Rebuilding isn't just sweeping up a shattered vase and painstakingly gluing the fragile pieces back together so it looks exactly the way it did before.
Right, because then it's just a broken vase with glue on it.
Exactly. If you do that, the material is still fragile. The exact same impact will easily shatter it again. True rebuilding is taking that broken glass, throwing it back into the furnace, melting it down entirely, and forging a completely solid, impenetrable block.
You're completely changing its nature.
Yes. You are changing the very nature of the foundation so the next storm can't even scratch it.
And this raises an important question about our natural psychological instincts.
What do you mean?
Well, think about when we experience profound loss. Whether it's a career dissolving, a long-term relationship ending, or a community fracturing, our immediate desperate instinct is nostalgia.
Oh, for sure. We just want things to go back to normal.
Exactly. We crave the comfort of the familiar. We want to reconstruct an exact replica of the life we just lost because we know how to navigate it. But the text heavily warns against this exact impulse.
Because the familiar life you are trying to recreate is the exact structure that failed.
Precisely.
Trying to build an identical replica means you are intentionally ignoring the fatal flaws that the fire just exposed.
And to avoid that trap, the individual has to perform an honest architectural audit of the ruins. They have to look at the wreckage of their life and objectively say, this relationship fell apart because the foundation was built on my own pride. Or this career collapsed because the load-bearing walls were made of complacency.
That is a tough pill to swallow.
It is brutal. Acknowledging those realities requires the complete dissolution of the ego.
Which perfectly circles back to the necessity of inner liberation we started with.
It's all connected.
You cannot perform an honest audit of your own failures if you are still enslaved by your ego. The ego's only job is to protect your self-image, which means it will relentlessly blame the fire, the weather, or other people for the collapse.
Right. The ego always points outward.
Exactly. It takes total inner freedom to stand in the rubble, point to a shattered pillar, and admit, I built that wrong.
Because without that ego death, you carry the same rotten materials into the new build. You just slap a fresh coat of paint on a flawed blueprint. The Knight of the East uses the clarity of their loss to ensure those specific weaknesses are permanently engineered out of the new structure.
Let's look at the actual physics of doing this, though. Because melting down broken glass, doing the brutal psychological work of dissolving your ego, auditing your deepest failures, and forging an entirely new foundation. That requires a staggering calorie burn of mental energy.
Oh, it is exhausting.
And when you have just barely survived a catastrophe, your tank is completely empty. Willpower is a finite resource. Sheer discipline isn't enough to sustain a multi-year rebuilding process.
No, discipline will eventually burn out.
Right, so there has to be a deeper engine driving this forward when your arms literally feel like lead.
And the text provides the mechanical engine for that sustained effort, and it identifies it as hope.
Hope?
Yes, but this is a concept that is frequently misunderstood in modern contexts.
Yeah.
Pike does not describe hope as a passive luxury emotion or, some kind of blind optimism.
It's just wishful thinking.
Not at all. Hope is a demanding absolute necessity. Without it, the physical and mental effort required to rebuild simply vanishes.
We so often treat hope as a passive state of waiting, don't we? You sit back, you cross your fingers and say, I hope things get better, basically expecting the universe to eventually deliver a solution on a silver platter.
Yeah, that's the modern, diluted version of hope.
But the text treats hope as an active, burning fuel source. It's combustion.
Exactly. Hope, in the philosophical framework of the Knight of the East, is the radical, defiant belief that the future structure you are designing is worth the sheer agony of the present moment.
Wow.
It is the vivid, unwavering vision of the completed stronghold that forces you to keep mixing mortar and laying bricks in the freezing rain. It bridges the massive gap between the destruction you survived and the transformation you are aiming for.
And if you lose that?
If that vision wavers, if you lose hope, the hammer drops, and you remain in the ruins.
So what does this all mean? Let's take this philosophy completely out of the abstract and directly into your own life.
Yeah, let's ground it.
Think about what you are currently rebuilding right now. Maybe you are reconstructing your career after a massive public failure. Maybe you are trying to rebuild your fundamental sense of self-worth after a deeply toxic relationship stripped it away.
Or maybe you are just trying to rebuild your daily routine after a long, paralyzing period of depression.
Exactly. When you are faced with that ruin, do you allow the destruction to define you, or do you actively let the fire temper you? Are you exhausting yourself trying to glue a fragile vase back together, or are you doing the brutal work of melting down the glass?
And answering those questions leads to the ultimate transformation this chapter points toward.
Right.
By cycling through the intense pain of loss, the desperate struggle of the crucible, and the exhausting, sustained effort of rebuilding fueled by active hope, the individual undergoes a fundamental alchemy.
You simply do not come out the other side as the same person.
You really don't. The composition of the person has changed. The Knight of the East who emerges standing on the new foundation is completely different from the person who suffered the initial loss.
They've been upgraded.
They possess a deep, tested wisdom. They have stared directly into the terrifying void of having nothing, survived it, and actively built a fortress capable of withstanding the world.
It is a remarkably empowering framework. It takes the darkest, most destabilizing moments of the human experience and reframes them not as punishments, but as the essential raw materials required for actual greatness.
It's a complete paradigm shift.
It really is. So let's briefly distill the massive territory we've covered in this deep dive. We started by tearing down the illusion of physical freedom, realizing that true liberation is the internal severing of fear and ego.
Right.
We looked at the harsh reality of loss, understanding that the crucible of exile is the ultimate diagnostic tool to test what you were actually made of.
And then we explored the mechanics of resilience, recognizing that comfort only breeds fragility, while the fires of adversity act as the furnace that tempers the human spirit into something shatter-resistant.
And finally, we broke down the slow, agonizing process of rebuilding. We saw how crucial it is to use ego death to audit our past failures, ensuring we don't recreate the same fragile structures, but instead forge something vastly superior.
All driven entirely by the radical active engine of hope.
Yes, this philosophy provides a profound, actionable blueprint for navigating the inevitable collapses we all eventually face.
And this journey of discovery doesn't stop here either.
Oh, definitely not. In our next deep dive, we're going to explore the archetype of the Prince of Jerusalem. We'll be taking these intensely personal, internal lessons of resilience and rebuilding and expanding them outward.
That's where it gets even bigger.
Yeah, we'll look at broader perspectives of leadership, responsibility, and how we govern not just our own lives, but our communities.
Because once you possess the strength to rebuild yourself, you inherit the responsibility to help rebuild the world around you.
That is a perfect way to set up the next topic.
Mm-hmm.
But before we go, we want to leave you with a final thought to mull over. We've talked extensively today about how losing everything is the ultimate catalyst for discovering your true, tempered strength.
We have.
So consider this. If true strength, deep wisdom, and profound transformation can only be unlocked through the painful loss of what we once had, might the very thing you are most terrified of losing right now actually be the one obstacle standing in the way of the person you're meant to become?
That is a question worth sitting with.
It really is. Stay strong, rebuild with purpose, and we will catch you on the next Deep Dive.